Good morning, everyone. I'm showing it's 9 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first meeting of the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Marie Burks, and I'm Program Director with the Higher Education Coordinating Board. Before we begin, I would like to ask that participants observe the following etiquette. If you could please state your name before speaking. Please mute your phone or your computer when you're not speaking. And please try to keep background noise to a minimum. So we are joined this morning by Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board Commissioner Dr. Harrison Keller. And Dr. Keller will now provide an introduction and remarks to start our meeting. So welcome, Commissioner. Please proceed.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Marie. And thank you all for your willingness to participate on this committee. So, of course, this is one of those committees we're required to do by statute to convene the committee every 2 years, and it has to work on a fairly compressed timeline. This is an important committee. This is something that's important to the coordinating board. It's certainly important to the governor's office and as input to the legislative process. I know I think many of you that I see on the Zoom pretty well. I know how busy you are. I know that this is a big ask to take time away to work on these issues, and really appreciate your willingness to participate. So in particular, we're going to ask you to spend your time meeting with the committee and preparing for the committee meetings to help develop recommendations on formula funding, including appropriate funding levels and the additional potential changes related to formula funding, working around the current structures. In the end, we'd like to make sure that the financial incentives for all of our public institutions align with our state's goals for higher education. As many of you all know, we're currently in the process of refreshing the 60 by 30 Texas goals around 4 key areas. So first, broadening the scope of the 60 by 30 goals, the headline goal. So it's not just focused on the young working population, but where we've got more intentional focus on the needs of adult learners. We're also focusing attention on high value credentials. What are those kinds of credentials that are going to be especially in demand, especially important for individuals, for communities, and for the state? We have also had robust discussions about how we might bring considerations of the research and development mission of institutions back into the higher education goals. Of course, that was part of the closing the gaps goals, but then fell off of the 60 by 30 Texas goals. And then finally, across all of our goals, to have a more visible and intentional focus on equity. Where we are in that process now is we're doing deep dive interviews with state and national experts on each of these 4 core areas. We've worked with several of your institutions to convene regional listening sessions. We heard from about 500 community leaders across the state. Last spring, we held a virtual summit and heard from more state and national experts. And so now we're developing for our steering committee some draft recommendations. It'll be, the aim is to present those to our board in the October meeting, and then that will be the main focus of our leadership meeting at the beginning of December. So there should be some overlap where hopefully that work will be useful to this committee as you're considering the implications for our funding formulas. Could we at least all agree that our recommendations for formula funding shouldn't punish institutions when they're streamlining students' progress to credential, and when your institutions are innovating and how they deliver on their missions for their communities and for the state? I would argue that one of the problems in our current formulas is that we haven't aligned the incentives very well with our state goals. Also, of course, this committee is in a unique position because Senate Bill 1230 passed last session, which will establish a Texas Commission on Community College Finance. that's going to operate on a little different timeline. So that commission is supposed to convene sometime in not later than October. And the legislation tasked that commission with conducting a thorough analysis of finance and policy issues facing community colleges. My hope is that this standing committee and that commission's work complement each other. So we've crafted charges for the committee to hopefully focus your time on issues that are required by statute to be considered through the commission, but we will do our best from the coordinating board side as that commission gets organized to cross-pollinate the work. We're charged by statute to help provide technical assistance to that commission. So I'll leave it to the staff, to the committee chair, to get into specifics of each charge. I do want to emphasize again how much we appreciate your willingness to take this on, especially given all of the demands on your time and the issues you're working through for your campuses. And before I hand it back over to the staff and the chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have any questions for me. Well, so again, thank you for your willingness to serve on the commission, and I'll hand it over to the staff and the chair to kick off the meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate your time. I will now turn the meeting over to the convening chair from North Central Texas College, Dr. Brent Wallace.
Thank you, Commissioner, for being with us. We know you're a busy man and we appreciate your time. Good morning. I'd like to call the Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee meeting to order, and I'd like to welcome each of you that are in attendance with us today and appreciate your time, where I know you're all very busy individuals. I'm Dr. Brent Wallace. I'm Chancellor at North Central Texas College, and I am serving as the convening chair, as Ms. Burke mentioned, for this meeting. Please be advised, as mentioned earlier, that we are being broadcast over the internet and recorded. So we ask that you attendees silence your technology until you'd like to speak. And if you have something you'd like to say, either mute and unmute as we go along would be the best plan for this particular meeting. We appreciate that. We need to begin by taking roll, and I'm going to ask Ms. Burke if she would to call the roll, please.
Yes. Mr. Texas Buckholtz.
Present.
Mr. Richard Cervantes.
Present.
Ms. Terry Crawford.
Here.
Thank you. Ms. Mary Elizondo.
Present.
Mr. Raul Garcia.
Here.
Mr. Jonathan Hoekstra.
Present.
Mr. Patrick Lee.
Present.
Dr. Cesar Maldonado.
Present.
Dr. Jesus Rodriguez.
Present.
Ms. Mary Wickland.
Present.
And Mr. Jim Yiannopoulos.
Present.
A quorum is present.
Thank you very much. That's a full membership, and we appreciate that so much. Item 3 is the election of committee chair and vice chair. I'd like at this time to open the floor for nominations of the committee chair. If you would like to nominate someone, please state your name for the record and your nomination, please, at this time.
Brent, this is Jim Yiannopoulos. I'd like to recommend you as committee chair.
Okay, Jim, we appreciate that. Richard, I noticed that you were unmuted as well, sir.
Yes, I would like to also second that nomination.
Okay, great. I am willing to serve. That's the second question on the list. Normally you would ask the participant if they're willing to serve, and I am. But do we have any other nominees to be considered? Okay, hearing none, we have a first from Dr. Yiannopoulos and a second from Mr. Cervantes. Of all those that are in favor of Dr. Brent Wallace for chair, would you please signify by saying aye or raise your hand?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. I appreciate your faith in. We will work hard together and thank you for that support. At this point, the newly elected chair would have normally taken over, so I guess I will continue. We need to now, our next order of business is the selection of our vice chair. If you'd like to nominate someone, again, if you would please state your name and for the record and the name of your nomination for vice chair.
Yes, Dr. Wallace, this is Richard Cervantes at Blinn College. I would like to nominate Raul Garcia for the role of the vice chair.
And this is Mary Elizondo, and I second that.
We have a first and a second for Mr. Garcia. Do we have any other nominations at this time? Hearing none, all those in favor of Raul, would you please signify by raising your hand or saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you for agreeing to serve, Mr. Garcia. I think you would have told us if you weren't, as your name was mentioned. So we appreciate your willingness to serve. So moving on in our agenda, item 4 is a briefing on the community college and technical colleges funding formulas, and Ms. Burke is going to present that, our program director from the board. So Ms. Burke, you have the floor.
Great, thank you so much. Just waiting a moment for the presentation to be pulled up. All right, thanks everyone. I'll now provide a brief overview of community, state, and technical college formula funding. So first, we will take a look at the role of the Formula Advisory Committee and formulas in allocating available funds. We'll also review the formula recommendation timeline, components of each sector's formula, and then highlights from the last biennium. So as outlined in the Texas Education Code, committees are included in the development and refinement of funding formula and are made up of representatives from a cross-section of institutions. So the Community and Technical College Advisory Committee, known as the CTC FAC, makes recommendations for community colleges, state colleges, and technical colleges. The funding formula here is allocated using base year data. Just a few reminders here. Formulas are the tool used to allocate available funds. Appropriations are made to institutions as a lump sum, so they reflect how state funds are allocated and not how they must be spent. Here on the right, I just have some general guidelines from the Texas Education Code for formulas, particularly to include consideration of fixed and variable cost, and also alignment with the coordinating board's statewide strategic plan 60x30 TX. So we will now turn to the timeline for formula funding recommendations. So beginning now and through December or possibly January, the advisory committee will develop and submit recommendations to the agency commissioner. And then in the spring, the commissioner will finalize those recommendations and the board will adopt them. So spring 2022 is when the preliminary base year for the next cycle begins. Then in the summer, the final recommendations will be transmitted to the LBB and the Office of the Governor, and our final base year will begin. And then in the fall, we will run the funding formulas consistent with the approved recommendations with preliminary base year data. So now we will take a look at the components of each formula for each sector, beginning with community colleges. So the contact hour funding for community colleges constitutes the majority of the community college allocation. The contact hours do include a 10% bump for critical fields. And those contact hours are also weighted by a cost study of disciplines across the two-year institutions, which is known as the Report of Fundable Operating Expenditures. The second largest component of community college formula funding is success points. This is an outcomes-based formula in which institutions receive points for each milestone completed by a student in an academic year in that base year. Then our third component is core operations. This provides a minimum equal amount of funding for each district. And then lastly, the smallest but worth a mention is the Bachelor applied technology funding. And this applies to just a handful of community colleges that have legacy baccalaureate programs funded at the general academic institution rates. All right, we're going to take a moment to look at success points in a little more detail, as this outcomes-based funding has increased in this most recent biennium, and it also pertains to each of the 3 charges that are focused on community colleges. So you'll notice here the shaded boxes on this slide indicate a change in the weighting of points awarded for a metric. And as you can see, 30 semester credit hour attainment, credentials awarded in critical fields, and transfer all had increases in their points in the 2022-2023 biennium. You may recall from your materials that charge 4 for the committee is to recommend a process of adding and removing critical fields. So here I'd just point out, please note that completion in a critical field receives additional weight. And in fact, non-critical field weighting decreased from 2 to 1.2 points. On our next slide, we'll just take a quick recap of 2022-2023 appropriations for community colleges. So overall, the funding remained flat in this sector, but student success points made up a greater share of appropriations than they have in prior biennia. Of course, contact hour funding remained the largest component at 79% of the sector's funding. If we look at combined contact hour and student success point funding, you can see student success point funding increased from 13% to almost 18% from the prior biennia. So this is a trend we've seen that is perhaps accelerating. So. On the next slide, we will take a look at the Lamar State College's formula funds or funding. So there's also contact hour funding in this sector, and the funding appears in the academic and vocational and technical education strategies. The funding here is calculated based on the contact hour formula similar to the community colleges. It just has a different rate. The infrastructure formula provides support for maintenance and utilities, and this formula allocates funding based on our space projection model and the predicted square feet for the institution. The small institution supplement provides funding to campuses that have fewer than 10,000 students, and this is to help account for economies of scale.
Ms. Burks, may I ask a question?
Yes.
This is Jim, and I'm probably the only one that doesn't know this. Why is Lamar State College different from the community colleges or the other senior institutions? Is it because of the size?
So unlike the community colleges, the Lamar State colleges don't have local funding. So that is one key distinction there. In terms of why they are separate from the general academics, I think it's because of their focus on 2-year education.
Okay, so focus on 2-year, but doesn't have local funding. Okay.
Correct.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Dr. Wallace. I see your head shaking.
Yes, please correct me if there's anything additional to add to that.
That's absolutely correct. That's just how Lamar system was founded originally and legislatively funded. So it's been that way for its inception, Jim. So yes.
Great question. Thank you. All right, on our next slide, we'll take a look at the appropriations for Lamar State colleges. So here again, contact hour funding makes up the majority of the appropriations, with infrastructure and the small institution supplement being almost equal. So compared to the most recent biennium, overall funding did increase for the Lamar State colleges. This was driven by increases in infrastructure and contact hour funding. We will now move on to look at the Texas State Technical College formulas. So this includes 3 components: the return value formula, infrastructure, and small institution supplement. So infrastructure and small institution supplement operate very similarly to the Lamar State colleges, but the return value is a unique aspect of Texas State Technical College's formula funding. It is very outcomes based, which is distinct also from the community colleges. So it is based on 5 years of wage data for TSTC graduates, transfers, and students that leave with more than 9 semester credit hours. So this formula seeks to measure the economic value of the TSTCs contributed to the Texas state economy, and it measures wages for those students over and above the minimum wage. So, we can move on now to the next slide to look at a recap of funding for TSTC this last biennium. So you'll see return value funding makes up 85% of the institution's funding. And compared to last biennium, this sector also did have an increase in funding, and it was driven by that return value formula and infrastructure.
Dr. Wallace, can I ask another question? I'm sorry to keep interrupting.
Oh, that's fine.
And I probably know this, TSTC funding, and we talked about it when I was on the committee last year. This covers the entire, I guess they have 5 campuses. This is their total funding package? Okay.
Yes,
All right, thank you.
this does include all of the campuses, yes.
Okay.
Great.
And Mary, I would also remind the committee, we have representation on the committee from both the Lamar system. Mary, I think you're with us. We also have representation from TSTC. Jonathan is with us too. So no better experts than those living it every day. So if we have any questions of detail, I know they can provide that for us.
Thank you. I wasn't being critical of them. I was just trying to get my information correct here. So thank you.
Good point. Lastly, I just wanted to take a look at the Formula Advisory Committee charges. These are in your agenda materials. And as we proceed to the next agenda item and consider perhaps work groups or distributing the different charges, there are 5 total charges. So the charge 2 in blue here relates to the Lamars. Charge 3 is in red for TSTC. Charges 1, 4, and 5 do relate to the community colleges. And as mentioned before, they all do reference student success point funding. So that'll be an important piece. At this time, I can take any questions on the overview, or if there are no further questions, we can proceed to the next agenda item. So please do let me know in the chat or speak up if you have a question.
Any questions? As we move along, there may be questions, and our resources are here. And so that will be an easy thing for us to do. I am, if you don't mind, Mary gonna ask you to leave the charges up as we move through the next agenda. I think that's a nice visual for us. If you don't mind, that'd be awesome. So moving on to the next agenda item, that is a discussion of the charges that have been presented to us by the commissioner. I'd like to take these one at a time, have discussion around each charge. And then as Ms. Burke pointed out, I think it's going to be important, as we're accustomed to create work groups around each of these areas if we believe that's a good idea that has worked in the past. Dr. Rodriguez, do you have a question, sir?
Yes, Brett, I don't know if we're going to dive into it as we move forward, but again, just for my understanding, how do the critical fields get determined? And how can we change or add to it or take away? I mean, how do we influence that area, the critical fields?
I think that is a part of the work we may need to do. As you heard the commissioner's statement earlier, that there are some missing perhaps pieces to that narrative, and that the critical fields, especially those that we are seeing created post-pandemic, are probably going to have shifts. So I think that's a conversation we need to have, Roberto, and I think it's important that we focus on that. Ms. Burke, you might want to add to that conversation.
Yeah, and I would also point to, if you have a chance to look at the agenda materials, there's a little bit more background on charge 4. A similar charge was included in the last Formula Advisory Committee. And so we've recapped the work that group did. If I recall correctly, the critical fields had not been updated in quite some time. So the advisory committee last time actually recommended an entire process for adding and removing critical fields for whatever reason that did not gain traction in this legislative session, and they've asked you guys to take another look at it. But it is outdated, and again, there is a model that was put forth from the last Formula Advisory Committee that perhaps you may want to tweak or totally re-envision as a committee.
Dr. Wallace, I believe if my memory is right, and it probably isn't, but that was tied to TWC as well. So a lot of the information we get on critical fields had to come from the Texas Workforce Commission. So there was a big linkage there.
You are correct. Absolutely. Yes.
And that's, I think, where we've got to get traction. I don't know how we work with that, but anyway.
Well, and our charge is separated from the work of TWC, of course, but there is
Right.
the work we do can influence and perhaps inform TWC of the things that we feel are important to critical fields. And that has to be one of the things we discussed the last time we met when we were working was that notion of how do we have a process in place to add critical fields and not slowly. One of the challenges associated with that is they change dramatically and quickly. We've got to have some flexibility to say, here's a critical field that may be here now and today, but may not be here in 2 years. There'll be another iteration of that field. So those things that are a challenge for everyone at the technical education side, for sure.
Yes, sir. And also, you know, with the community colleges being spread all over the state, those critical fields shift. So, you know, at one point they had taken away farming and ranching and all that stuff. I'm right here in the middle of Texas. I go, are you kidding me? So, you know, that influence, we've got to figure out how to balance all of that.
Understand. Roberto?
I mean, music to my ears, but really there has to be an understanding in how do we address those lag and leading measures that address the critical fields. Because it seems a lot of that information is lagging. So I think we need to balance the lagging and the leading measures or other critical fields. And as our colleague mentions, there has to be a regional point to it, because a critical field might not address a certain section of our community in a part of a state. It might be tailored to Houston or Dallas or San Antonio and not address rural communities or other parts of our state.
And I think when we want to go through each of the charges, when we get to charge 4, I think that's going to be an excellent point of conversation when we create our work group. And I'm thinking, Roberto, you may want to head that work group because when we get there, because there's some work we have to do, folks, in the work groups. It's just too hard to do as a combined group of bringing together. But let's have that conversation when we get to charge 4 again, with your permission as a committee. I think that's a good.
And Dr. Wallace, I'd be happy to help Roberto.
You're on that. You're added to the list, Jim.
Yeah.
Not
You
a
know,
problem.
I'll give you one example. You know, we train soldiers coming out of the military in their last 180 days, and we get them trained right here in Texas. And what the workforce said, well, we'll pay for them as long as they're in this region. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so we took that to the leadership of TWC and said, look, if we can train these soldiers right here, and then they leave and go to Lubbock, or they go to Houston, or they go San Antonio, they can be employed there. Why can't we train them here? And so finally they put their heads together and said, you know, that's correct. It doesn't make sense. So if you're training people down there, why can't they come here and go to work? You know, so anyway, yeah, I'll be happy to work with you.
Perfect. Let's dive in for a moment then to charge 1, which we'll begin with, which is to study and make recommendations for appropriate funding levels for our contact hour, core, and student success funding as it relates to TEC section 610659B. For the 22-23 biennium, I remind the committee that the formulas were funded at $1.83 billion. As you heard Ms. Burks speak to, there were some reallocations last sessions of where those fall as far as success points versus contact hour formula funding. But staff provided several graphs and charts of historical data in your agenda materials, and I'd like us to have a little bit of conversation there. I would like to entertain a notion, maybe Richard, I think that's something that Richard might be a good work group leader for this and then some of our others that would like to be a part of that. But let's have a little bit of open discussion about charge 1 thoughts, where we'd like to go, and maybe those of you interested in that work group for that section.
Yes, Dr. Wallace, this is Richard. I'd be happy to lead that effort on that subcommittee or participate in it, whichever way would work best.
So unless someone else has a passion to lead the work group, let's let Richard kind of be our point person for charge 1, but we do need to assign some others to assist in that conversation. Anyone that, Terry, are you kind of, that's been a passion of yours for a couple of meetings before?
Yeah, this is Terry Crawford, San Jacinto College. I would love to serve on that committee.
Okay. Any others? What I'd like to do is start, okay, Tex, you're interested in that as well, sir? Perfect. What I'd like to do is get the committee kind of organized in each of the charges first, but then have discussion, folks. We need to have open discussion as to thoughts to give somewhat guidance to the work group so that they know the thoughts of the committee as a whole. And Emily or any of you that have a different opinion of that, let me know, please, if we're going a different direction than you think would work. Mary,
this is Mary Wicklund with the state colleges.
yes.
Even though I've been on the committee for a long time, but so how many people do we want in the subcommittees? And of course, I guess I'm going to be in group number 2, but is there some kind of need for diversity, for other perspectives for the other study groups?
I believe, Mary, that's essential. I think it's very important. And as we had already witnessed with some of the questions as the data was being presented, if you're new to the committee or you're just new to Texas or any of those things, there sometimes is a misunderstanding of for example, the success point structure that TSTC follows in job placement data versus Lamar's historic. So I think that would be great for you to serve on that one. I think we're best suited to no more than 4 probably per work group, because then it becomes a scheduling difficulty for you all, in my opinion. And Vice Chair Garcia, please chime in at any point you have any comment about this as well. But I think that's something we may want to try to do, is keep it to 4, no more than 5. That's what we've done in the past in order to really be able to meet. Mary, did you have another question in that?
Well, no, it's just that whatever other one that you think that I would be helpful with, I'll be glad to serve. But I do, want to be in charge too. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I have you on work group 1 with charge 1.
Okay, great.
I think that makes perfect sense. And then Jonathan, we may have you serve on something that's outside the TSTC charge 3. We'll get to it in a moment. But did I have a question from Mary Elizondo?
Oh, yes, no, I just would like to be in that first group also.
Okay, we can do that, and that probably fits us there then with that group, and that gets us to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think that's a good gathering. Now, that being said, anything that the committee would like to inform? Cesar, did you, Dr. Manalo, do you have a question, sir?
Well, Brent, no, while we're going around the room expressing interest, I just wanted to let my colleagues know that charge 4 and 5 for me really fit close to some of the challenges that we have. So I certainly would enjoy working on both of those if possible. And I'll help anywhere else that you might need me to help. Thanks.
I appreciate that. That's perfect. Wonderful. Any comments to charge 1 for consideration? I mean, the charge is pretty straightforward in the sense of making recommendations. There was a lot of work placed in this. Those of you that served before last year, we had a lot of work there. We did see a little different spin in the final legislation and the final appropriation, but any comments about that for our Richard as he works with this group? Any other? Okay. Hearing none, we're going to move then to charge 2. Charge 2 is to study and make recommendations for appropriate funding for the operations support of space support formulas for the state colleges. And so that staff has provided, again, data for you in your the operation support space supported by those in your agendas. And we're open for discussion there. And that would be, I think that Mary is a good resource to be the head of that particular work group, Ms. Wicklund. There are two Marys with us.
I will be glad to accept that.
And she's not new to that role. Jonathan, did you have a question or comment, sir? You want to be on that?
Well, I thought I might share some perspective and possibly add some value to that process.
Well, and I think we need to also be mindful of TSTC's. Jonathan, you can add a lot of value to our conversations when it comes to critical fields, and then the workforce piece too, that all of us have seen that work so diligently and well for TSTC. I think we all need to be more knowledgeable every day of that job placement formula, and that goes in hand with, even in my opinion, the critical field conversation. And so absolutely. So we have Mary and Jonathan. I'm going to ask Dr. Garcia, do you mind, or Mr. Garcia, which Dr. Mr. whoever, do you mind participating in that one as well, sir?
Yes, I do not mind. I will say this, though. I'm definitely interested in charge number 5.
Okay.
But I'm not too sure how balanced it would be in terms of my schedule, in terms of, as well as the needs of the committee to serve on both charges. I'm willing. Just trying to figure out how to balance it. And, just bear with me. This is my 3rd year with the state of Texas. And so I'm just trying to get up to speed with everything. And so just learning as I go, and looking forward to working with each and every one of you. Just a quick comment on charge 5. I know you're wanting to stick to this order, but I did hear earlier about bringing in some diversity into some of these categories. And so I think 5, I think would be important to the extent that we all have very unique operating environments. I heard about, one institution operating in an environment that's agricultural driven, right? An economy that's agricultural driven. So, how do you balance it where you have an institution that's urban driven, and so the local economies and the status of the business economy local will vary from one region to the other. I can tell you here in Corpus, we are experiencing an economic boom on our side, and so my needs are going to be a little bit different. And so, how do we balance that out is my biggest question in terms of trying to be equitable across the board with all these different unique characteristics of our operating environment. So just those are my thoughts.
I think that's a really good point, Raul, and I was happy to hear. And if you notice the commissioner's statement early on in the meeting regarding the 60 by 30 and the work of equity in that, I think is an important conversation to be had. So I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think there's several charges in which equity could be embedded in the work we do, and it should be. So I appreciate that follow-up. Absolutely. So right now we have charge 2 with Mary, Jonathan, Raul, and I would entertain some others of you that may be willing to or want to be a part of that. Patrick, did you want to?
I can assist with that one.
Okay, Patrick, perfect. And so I'm going to move to 3, and we can go back. We can revisit as we go along and make sure our work teams are not overrun with 3 or 4 of you having to serve on multiple. That gets really hard. But let's move to charge 3, is to say recommendations appropriate for funding level 4 and the refinement of the Texas State Technical College System's Return Value Formula Fund. And again, staff provided a lot of good data on that. So I think that, Jonathan, you make perfect sense to lead that work group, please, if you're willing.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
And I think, Mary Wicklund, Mary, you sometimes have had at least a listen in on that as well. I don't know if that's something you want to do, or if you want to just stick to the one charge, or.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
We've contemplated it going back and forth,
Yeah.
looking at return value, but I don't know.
Well, and
It's tough to get started.
it is. It is. Any other?
Dr. Wallace, this is Terry Crawford. I would like to understand TSTC's formula funding better.
All right, perfect. Any others? That's 3. We've got
This is Tex. I'll be glad to work.
Tex. All right, perfect. So we have a good membership there right at the moment. There's a lot of interest in 4 and 5. And so to move there, I think is makes a lot of sense. I would like Jim, as we look at charge 4 is to institute a formal process for the committee to recommend critical fields for inclusion and removal for success points based on the best available data and trends about regional and state workforce needs using this formula methodology and the most available data we have. And I think using the formula and most recent data would be able to develop for 2 sets of fields, maybe to the coordinating board, 1 set of fields recommended for additions to the critical fields list, and then 1 set recommended for the removal from the critical fields list. I think that's the notion of where we need to go. General Appropriations Act is mentioned in the Senate Bill 1 of the 87th.
Yep.
And so Rider 24, if you want to look at that, that's available to you as well. But I think that's how that particular Roberto, I think you can lead maybe that group. I know Jim is interested in serving with that as well. Others think that might be something that you would like to. I would like to be in the room for that one myself, because as chair, I think that's going to be one of the bigger lifts perhaps for the committee this particular season. So I would like to be engaged in that one. But Roberto, if you'd lead that one for us, perhaps Jim can of course be in there as well.
Love that.
Any others? I know there are others interested in it. Yes, Richard.
Yeah, I'd be interested in that, but if it becomes too unbalanced, then I'm fine with adding some assistance to number 5 too. So whichever one you think would work best.
Perfect. I think you can join forward at this point. Jonathan, are you interested in that as well?
Yeah, I'd be happy to serve as a resource on that, certainly.
That's a pretty good work group now. And so we'll move.
Brent, don't forget me.
You're on there, Cesar. I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. And I would like to just be able to be in, I don't necessarily need to be involved in the actual, down and dirty work. If I miss a meeting, I'd just like to sit in on that one myself on occasion. Just because I think that's something we're going to have a larger conversation at our next meeting, perhaps, and some of those things. Charge 5 again has the same kinds of impact that we've talked about under 4, and that is to study and make recommendations for the inclusion of qualified non-credit workforce continuing ed courses, post-secondary industry certs, and other workforce credentials and student success points implications to our existing formula methodologies, and as needed, we making recommendations how on any of the associated data and reporting, course requirements, or funding levels. Again, that goes back to Senate Bill 959 of the 87th. You can also find several regular session 2021 and Senate Bill 1102 from the 87th. There's a lot of that. And staff, again, has done a great job of putting together for us workforce continuing education data, funding, and success points funding agenda materials has that. This has been a big conversation, folks, for so many of us. I think, Cesar, if you don't mind, maybe in leading the conversation on 5, if you're willing to do that, sir.
Sure, be glad
I'd
to.
like to help with that, Brent.
Jim.
I'd like to assist.
Roberto.
Yourself.
Okay. I feel like we need, I think it would behoove us in that conversation to probably at least as resource. Understand, again, I hate to put this on Mary and Jonathan, but there's a lot of crossover conversation, and maybe more than anything, it is reach out to individuals on the committee to have those conversations if we need to, or get data from them, even if they're not formally serving on the work group. Please reach out to Ms. Burke, and there's always options to collect that data. Has anyone not been appointed to one of the work groups? I think we've got a good one. Ms. Burke, have you helped me kind of keep up with this too?
Yes, I am keeping a list. Is Raul Garcia on charge 5?
Yes, please.
Okay.
I would like him to serve on that one as well. Yes, if you're willing to, Raul.
Yes, thank you.
And anyone else that is interested, again, all this work comes back to us as a full body, so there will be opportunities. And I want to open this again up to the full body to say, if you have some things you want these work groups to look at any of the charges, this is the time in which to bring that to our attention, because we're going to have a lot of work to do immediately and start that process quickly, because when we look at our next agenda item, we're looking at another meeting for September where we start the trajectory of the work. So anything we've heard, Roberto, your comments earlier in the meeting and your concerns about critical fields and Jim, but any other information for the greater group to have a conversation around on any of the charges?
On charge number 5, and some of the colleagues touched on it, it is important. As community colleges, we do have short-term training programs. For example, here at Texas Southmost College, I've got a 80-hour program. It's 2 weeks. I have 100% placement rate. Their starting salary is about $50,000 to $60,000. And they can go up to 100,000. That's not a critical field. That is not being funded. So it's difficult to get those types of funding. So there's a lot of work that we're doing on the short-term non-credit workforce CE side that needs to be addressed. And it's going to be interesting, and it's a multi-layer complexity of it. I think that's
Absolutely
the approach we need to take.
Absolutely.
Brent, this is Terry Crawford again. I think for charge 5, I'm hoping that you guys will look at some of the true courses and true programs that are being set up. The True Initiative was passed in the 87th legislature, and that is those short-term programs that lead to higher wages. And I think the commissioner referred to it as credentials of value. Those credentials of value aren't just associate degrees. They could also be those shorter-term programs. And so I would say really look at the true programs and incorporate that somehow in the recommendation.
Absolutely. Ms. Burks, are you going to send out a roster of all the committees so we know?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. I will include that in the minutes that I will share with the committee to approve.
Will we have contact information?
I will include that as well.
Yeah.
I'll include the roster. Yeah.
And also on page 3, folks, of your agenda today, there are, I think that has most of our office phone number, contact information, email. We can resend that with the minutes as well, but that's also available on page 3 of our full agenda today. So it's a good reference. Roberto, back to your conversation. I think we need to look at, we had a pretty large conversation last time we met, and Terry, you were there and several of you, but we had this conversation of critical fields versus targeted occupation, targeted field. I think we need to hone in on that narrative to make sure that we aren't differentiating in some way a targeted versus critical field, because we talked at that point about how do you, project the growth of an industry, add to that if it has a high end absolute growth positive plus opening within the next 10 years in Texas, it ought to be able to be put on that critical fields list quickly. I think that aligns very well, though, with what we heard the commissioner present to us as our charge, and that's the idea of equity and the idea of credentialing being done in an effective way but funded appropriately. I think we are going to it's funny, those of us that served, we literally served and made the recommendations last time, and then we went straight into pandemic. And and it kind of, I don't know about the rest of you. I don't know that our narrative would have been quite the
That one
same.
wasn't on the list, Brent.
I know. And so I sit there going, I think there's been a major shift in the sense that that's even more readily a concern is our workforce. And as Terry mentioned, the True Initiative and combined with some other things may open it up. Jan, we talked about some criteria, if I remember correctly, about medium hourly wage as a part of that conversation, in that if an existing occupation is below the minimum, median wage levels, that wouldn't or would be included. There was a lot of narrative last time that we may want to go back and look and not reinvent that conversation as totally, but look at what we were having as an overall. And we had two really powerful influences there. We had Dr. McMillan and we had Dr. Anglin on the board on the committee at that time that had a lot of knowledge. And Jeremy, specifically about some of that, we can look at some of the work that they presented even then. And Dr. Maldonado, is your hand up for a question, or are you just happen to have your hand still up? I'm just making sure.
No, it was up from last time.
Okay, all right.
Just a little slow today. Yeah, okay.
No problem. Just want to make sure if you have a comment or question.
Dr. Wallace,
yes,
I have something that this committee adopted last time that didn't make its way through legislation, that on charge 1, I would really like to see us look at again, was we had included a 0.5 point for the economically disadvantaged and the underserved. And I really think we need to keep our focus on that equity. As the commissioner said, we need to look at our state. We need to look at 60 by 30 and looking at that equity agenda. And we had also included a 0.5 point for students who completed dual credit. And so I think we need to me, that was still important. That was, again, something we adopted in our last Formula Advisory Committee that I would like to see us look at again for charge 1.
And to be very, very transparent, I appreciated the commissioner making comment to our work being extremely valuable. I know that there's probably a hidden kind of curiosity, if nothing else, about the commission bill that was mentioned, and the work of our work, how that will align and or work in tandem with the study on community college finance for those of us in that vein. But I agree with you, Terry. Yes. We tried to get the 0.5 increase to successful for economically disadvantaged. Dual credit is ever more growing, seems like, in many of our districts across the state, and even for those of you. And Jonathan, are you still on the call? That I can't see everyone at times. Yeah, there he is. Jonathan, the Tstc, I should know this. I'm going to ask a question. What kind of dual credit world do you all live in right now? And how is that affected in your funding? And also, Mary, you might tell us a little of Lamar. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's changed quite a bit. For a number of years, it wasn't included at all. When you looked at dual credit data in the return value model, it was really obscure. And part of that reflected an old way we were doing dual credit. We were in the initial launches of dual credit, we were very much academic transfer focused, and that has wholesale shifted. And so we have had funding the last 2 sessions that really was a special item blanket amount, even though at the last Formula Advisory Committee, I think the committee recommended that we shift to a contact hour approach like our community college peers here. And so that's something we're still sort of chasing down. Marie and Emily, y'all might have some comments on that. But
I just, as Jim mentioned earlier, it's hard to, we get in our own environment and we kind of forget how that affects our Lamar systems and Tstc as well. So Mary, do you have anything to add to that perhaps?
Yeah, for us, the dual enrolled students, I mean, they're just counted as part of our contact hour funding, but again, there's been a lot of struggle about, what they should pay, which is, of course, affects our collection on the local side because we depend so much on our collection of tuition and fees. And so, but they're just part of our regular contact hour funding. So, but they've become such a large population of our student body because we're small. So when you're, looking at it being, 25 to 30% of your population, it becomes significant, especially in pricing, what they pay. But again, and then you have the issue of them coming, we're also doing early college, high school, and so they're getting, they're getting their 60 hours, and some of them we will never even see. So that becomes a whole nother issue in itself. So, but anyway, that's how they're funded. And they are becoming, they're very significant, and they need a lot of help and a lot of services, to keep them on track.
Dr. Wallace, I'd like to, echo what Mary said. I think early college, high school, I guess that charge one needs to look at that and how that's rolled into dual credit or contact hour funding, or I don't remember us talking specifically about early college, high school the last committee we had. Do you
I
remember?
don't recollect that at all.
Just-
Jim.
yeah.
We did not.
I think that ought to be considered.
Also,
Dr. Wallace, this is Terry Crawford again. Sorry to keep
Okay.
talking, but so just as like with charge 4 and charge 5, or really charge 4, you're looking at the metrics for workforce and how do we create a process to add things, to remove things. I think on charge 1, we also need some flexibility to add and remove things, especially in our student success point funding.
Mhm.
And I'm going to refer right now to the pandemic, to that lost year of education. I don't know about the rest of you, but our developmental education just skyrocketed this fall semester. And so how do we keep that in the loop, that we may need to ramp that up on success points to get those students successfully through, but then you can ramp it back down because we were declining in developmental education, had a pandemic, and we've got the spike. And so really looking at not just a process for workforce metrics, but even other metrics of as things change. They may not change as frequently as some of the workforce, but just something to consider and think about.
well, and Terry, there's an added complexity that we have had to co-requisite those models. So in other words, it has to be with college prep, and so they're longer expended, they're longer hours in the classroom, and the last session made that the option. I mean, that's where we are. And so there's an added need to look at that. I totally agree with that. That's a very good point.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo what our colleague Terry mentioned on her previous comment in this one. Coming into this work, I feel that they're coming in with an open mind. And I think it's a good opportunity. If we need to reintroduce previous points, it might be an opportunity because there were solid recommendations in the past that hopefully we'll find a place to blossom with this work. So if the committee in charge of charge 1 will consider those previous comments.
Well, and we will be meeting as an entire group, enough folks that each time the work groups come forward, there is options for us to have further conversation, to move back out. I mean, as we're about to move into our next agenda item, we have some dates in which we can meet that will be follow-up conversations. And I know that Ms. Burks is our primary point here, but I know that the coordinating board staff are very, very willing and able to get us data we need and respond to those things. And so I think we've got a good start, ladies and gentlemen, to get the work groups informed. We will, Ms. Burks will get that information out to you as soon as possible in the work groups. And then I leave to those that are assigned leader roles in those work groups to work, if you would please, with Ms. Burks to make sure that she knows and is familiar with the calendar when you meet and can be participatory in that. That just is important that we keep the staff informed of when those work groups are taking place. But we will leave that sort of to the group leaders to organize those in addition with her. You want to comment to that too, Marie?
Well, yes, please do keep me in the loop. I'm sure the different work groups will want some information, and I'd love to sit in on the meetings, just time permitting. Would you like me to recap who's on each
if you would
charge at this time? Okay. So for charge 1, I have Richard leading that charge with Terry Crawford, Tex Buckholtz, Mary Wickland, and Mary Elizondo.
Right.
For charge 2, I have Mary Wickland leading with Jonathan Hoekstra, Raul Garcia, and Patrick Lee. And if I'm missing anyone, please let me know. For charge 3, I have that led by Jonathan Hoekstra, Mary Wickland, Terry Crawford, and Tex Buckholtz participating.
Correct.
Charge 4, I have led by Roberto, with Jim, Brent, Richard, Jonathan, and Cesar. And then for charge 5, I have that led by Cesar Maldonado with Roberto, Mary Wickland, and Jonathan Hoekstra, and Raul Garcia.
And
I thought I might be on that also.
Okay.
Are there too many?
It's only too many if we end up where we can't get everyone together in a meeting. That's the biggest challenge, folks.
Okay, no problem.
You know, we're very busy. I don't mind larger work groups. The concern I have is schedules. That's the only challenge. But with a larger group, you can rely on each other, and that's what email is for often. So, Terry, did you have interest in 5, or did we get you on the one that you had mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I can be on 5 as well. That would be fine.
Okay.
This is Emily Cormier with Coordinating Board. I would just chime in that for subcommittees, you do need to be careful about quorum.
Correct.
So at that point on charge 5, you'd have 7, so you'd have a quorum meeting.
Terry, we apologize. We cannot let you serve then because of quorum.
I'll back off, Brent, and let Terry serve it.
Terry, if you would serve, Jim will back out. 6 is top number, 5's perfect number.
Yeah, I'm busy with Saks.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's good. So you will get an email as soon as the staff is able to do that with those committees, et cetera. I'd like to go ahead then and move any further comments on the charges. Jonathan, did you have a?
Well, I noticed I showed up on several, and if I create any quorum issues, I'm happy to serve as a resource and participate. But if that helps, I'm happy to yield a seat or whatever.
And with permission, ladies and gentlemen, I will work with Ms. Burks and our vice chair, Mr. Garcia. We'll verify together, the 3 of us, that we're in good standing with the committees, that they're fair before we eliminate. And if we see a little shift, don't take it personal. Just know that we're trying to make sure the teams are equitable, and yet, and so thank you, Jonathan, for that. If we need to pull somebody here or there, we may do that with your permission. Okay. So discussion of dates, our next agenda item 6 is a discussion of dates and assignments for those subsequent meetings. We've done the work of the assigning of work groups, but in Appendix C of your agenda materials, you're going to find a tentative schedule of future meetings. At this point, it's my understanding we're going to continue with the virtual meeting, which is actually really helpful for a lot of us, but potential dates are scheduled as shown. Meeting 2 is Thursday, September 23rd, 10 a.m. Meeting 3, Tuesday, October 26th, meeting 4, the 16th of November, December 7. And if we need to, which we happened to do last time, if I remember correctly, we did have a January meeting, but that's only if we do not finish our work. Idyllically, ladies and gentlemen, we need to finish our work, if we can at all, by meeting 5, December 7th, and have that completed. But we do have an option for a January meeting if need be. Is there any discussion regarding those meeting times? I know that Ms. Burks will send that out in invites as she's done, and we'll get that on calendar. Did you want to talk to that?
I do. I think some people have conflicts with Tuesday mornings and second Tuesday mornings. So I will just say, if you all would prefer to move to the afternoon, Wednesday, Thursday, if that works better for people's schedules, I can certainly work on moving some of those meetings around. So these are tentative.
Any input there for coordinating board?
Yes, shows the second Tuesday of every, I'm sorry, Raul Garcia. The second Tuesday of every month is always a challenge for me because of board meetings. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be transitioning into my board meeting in the next couple of minutes this morning. It varies. It could be an all-day event with special presentations, or it just could be an afternoon thing for me.
Tuesdays are not good for me either, Brent. Every third and fourth Tuesday, I have board workshop or board meeting, but Wednesdays are wide open.
So I'm the odd duck. Perhaps my board meetings are evenings there, so I'm pretty well flexible. My board meets at nighttime, and so I don't. Third Monday evening is the only blockage I have that I can't tweak my schedule to fit the requirements of the committee. So. Ms. Burks, you want to maybe send out a different list to us and just see if we can tweak some of those and then get those on calendars. With your permission, we'll try to manipulate the schedule a bit to fit some of you all that have board meetings. We understand the need for that, for sure.
Sure. Overall, are there conflicts with Wednesday afternoons? Do you all prefer sort of 1 p.m., 2 p.m.?
I think Wednesday works best for me. I do have Thursday's meeting, even though it's late. I kind of prep Thursday afternoon for my board meeting, like Brent, but I think Wednesday works best for me. But I'm also flexible on if it has to be a Thursday morning. But Thursdays afternoons, I like to block it off.
Mine's a bigger problem. I'm fine with the dates. That whole week of October is there's some personal stuff going on that I'm on travel, so I will have a problem with that week. But other than that, I'm fine.
I have a SACS on-site visit September, but not the 23rd. By then, I'll either be thrilled or have more work to do. Jim, you know how that goes.
Sorry, Brent.
So
I recuse
23rd,
myself.
I'll feel very relieved.
I hear you, brother.
And I'll be on a site team that week as well. So that week's kind of a challenge.
Well, we will do our best, folks. Those of you chairing a group will try to work and make sure that we take the charges in a meeting where you're able to, for sure, if you're a work group leader, to present. And so we'll work together on that calendar and get that out as soon as possible. It's always a challenge. I'm very pleased that we had all attendance today. It's hard to make that happen. And one of the benefits of virtual is that we can usually attend in a virtual meeting and still have the 5 or 6 other meetings we need to have.
Brent, I have a point to ask you. If we have some input, because we're working with things all the time, like on Charge 5, we deal with that all the time. Would you prefer that we just send any kind of information we might have to that chair of that?
Jim, I'd prefer you send it to Ms. Burks and allow her then to disseminate to everyone that needs that information. I think that's just the best plan. And Emily or Marie, y'all can chime in on that, but I think that's a good point person. So if Jim, you've got an opinion or you've got some data you want to share, send it to her. She'll disseminate that to all those that need that information. I think that's our best plan.
Sounds good to me.
And then work group organizers, your point person, is one of three. You can either reach out to, of course, Marie, but you can reach out to myself or Mr. Garcia as well. If you have questions, as the chair and vice chair, we'll be glad to answer those as best as we can. And that may be that we call Ms. Burks again. All right. Is there any, before we close today, is there any data that we feel, and it's a kind of off your question of you, Jim, is there any data we feel we need in these groups that you know of right now that the coordinating board can provide? There's a lot of data and a lot of information in the board material today. And so I encourage you to look at that data first and make sure that that's what other data you may need in addition to that, let us know. But anything you're thinking of now in addition that we would need to give coordinating board staff a little bit of a heads up that this is something you'd like to look at. And you may not know that answer today, so if you don't, just reach out again. But thank you. Yeah, Roberto.
I was just gonna say, looking at the data, if we need additional information prior to setting up a meeting, do we reach out to Ms. Burks or to you? How do we go about collecting additional information?
Please reach out to Ms. Burks. She'll copy me on anything, and Mr. Garcia that we need, we'll get. And so I absolutely, please reach out to her.
Thank you.
Yeah. So as a group leader, does staff participate in this? Is there a designated staff for each of these, or is that how's that?
That will be, I'm assuming, and Marie, you may want to comment to that. I think that's up to the staff, but I would assume there will be a staff member in each of those if they can at all. I mean, I think that's how we've done it in the past, but you want to comment?
Yes, so I'm certainly, schedule permitting, will absolutely try to be there. And for certain charges, may need to bring in some other staff. So there's some other staff that have even deeper knowledge of workforce continuing ed and things like that. So may pull some other people in as needed.
But we've always had that in previous meetings. We've always had someone there that could help us find data or could help us be a resource. So we appreciate their work there. Good question. Any other questions or anything? Coordinating board team, anything that you would like to add in closing before we move to our next agenda item, which is adjournment?
No, thank you. I will send out the notes for everyone's review and also work groups so we can confirm those as soon as possible. So
perfect.
Thank you all.
If there are no further questions or point of discussion, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
All right.
I'll second.
And a second from
Got it.
Jim. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right. The Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advising Committee is adjourned until, at this point, September 23rd, 2021 at 10 a.m. But we appreciate your work and you all have a wonderful day.